The overall discourse surrounding the Season 3 opener is widely varied. Some people think it's outstanding, while for me, I landed in the middle and thought the episode was okay, with an almost equal weight of flaws and good aspects. Additionally, for context for my reviews this season, I've read Fire and Blood now, so I'll offer a more comparative analysis in regards to adaptation, and if Ryan Condal changed something for the worse, or every now and then for the better. So, of course, the elephant in the room for this episode is that it basically has to simultaneously operate as a finale and a season opener. Literally everyone is of the same opinion that this should have been episode 9. Moving this episode to the beginning of season 3 creates some weird connection points plot-wise. Two of which being Rhaena taming Sheepstealer and Jason Lannister's host getting obliterated off-screen. Starting with Rhaena, the continuity between these two scenes seemed to insinuate that after discovering Sheepstealer at the end of season 2, Rhaena had to continue chasing after the dragon. Not sure how she kept up, but when the dragon lands and kills a sheep, Rhaena is here. So, the general impression surrounding wild dragons should be that they're feral. They lack discipline, and you need to come up with a clever way to disarm the dragon and gain its trust. Instead, Rhaena seemingly gets very lucky that she happened to be here when Sheepstealer was eating a sheep, and was able to get on the dragon when he was at his most distracted. I feel you can write the scene with better conflict resolution, like Rhaena discovering a farm and trying to lead Sheepstealer to this food source, thus winning the dragon over or something, instead of this being resolved with a convenience. Design-wise though, Sheepstealer looks incredible.
He's so ugly! I love him!
Moving over to the other jarring connection point between seasons, we have Daemon fighting Lannisters in the Riverlands. For context in Fire and Blood, these fights are essentially all over the place and happen in a lot of different areas. So adapting all of this wouldn't be feasible. However, killing Jason Lannister off-screen, along with most of his host, feels a bit underwhelming considering that the last season was building up this confrontation. Realistically, this should have been the emphasis and opening of season 3 if the Battle of the Gullet was executed last season. The way it is currently, it feels like in terms of budget, the Gullet cannibalized the Battle over the Red Fork. This also kind of creates a point of confusion for non-book readers because we don't even reintroduce Jason Lannister going into this season. I had to explain to my fiance what just happened, which kind of echoes the point of this plot beat needing to be fleshed out more. Although, one highlight here is the introduction of the Winter Wolves. This line was straight out of Fire and Blood.
We've come to die for the Dragon Queen.
Roderick Dustin is a badass, so I'm very excited to see more of him later in the season.
There's a bunch of fucking lunatics coming out of the forest.
Yeah.
It also goes without saying that the production value is outstanding here, and Caraxes in the background having some occasional snacks was cute. Larys and Aegon end up getting captured, and I did like this scene in how Larys coolly and adeptly bought them more time by establishing themselves as valuable prisoners. The main issue with this plotline though is it's going to be stretched very thin this season. Ryan's going to have to come up with interesting plot points for these characters, as their journey was entirely not mentioned in Fire and Blood. So it's basically on Ryan to spice up this plotline and not make it a complete slog whenever we cut back to them. Thankfully though, both of these characters are great, so the dialogue and acting should at least be a consistent positive. Looking over at Rhaenyra, I think Ryan Condal did her pretty dirty this episode, and is where the writing was easily at its worst. Her first scene sees her being extremely giddy and excited that Alicent is surrendering King's Landing, entirely and almost comically ignoring her small council. Like, Rhaenyra isn't supposed to be a perfect leader. She's not the flawless realm's delight anymore, but writing her in this superficially foolish way is borderline jarring where she's not even listening to anyone. It gives the scene a lack of depth where there's virtually no debating or back and forth. You can still have Rhaenyra come to the conclusion that she wants to go to King's Landing, but have her actually defend her viewpoint. The way it is makes her character seem overly rash to an extent of being flat out silly. So fundamentally writing-wise, this should be a longer dialogue scene. It's ironically one of the shortest Black Council scenes that features the most contentious topic to ever come up. We've spent way more time in this setting discussing things of far less importance. This issue, in a general sense, points out the rushed pacing of this episode, where we have to cram in a bunch of crucial scenes while trying to make room for a 30-minute battle later. Scenes are flying by because we're quickly touching base with everyone in 2-minute intervals. Then, while on the topic of Rhaenyra, let's look at her other scenes. There's a major change in the second one where Jacaerys forces Sir Laurent to lock her in her room, thus not allowing her to participate in this battle, and allows Jace and Baela to finally do something they deem as impactful. A big part from what it seems like Ryan Condal is doing adaptation-wise is imbuing more character conflict behind the scenes, something that may not have been reported by Maesters in the books, although this is such a big action taken by Jace that it most definitely would have been mentioned in Fire and Blood. And this point is extremely questionable as to if Sir Laurent would actually listen to Jace. King/Queensguard take their oaths very seriously. It's a massive part of their identity that's steeped in honor. So I find it very hard to believe that you'd be able to peer pressure one into defecting and defying their grace's orders. Like, sure, you can try to argue that Sir Laurent is protecting Rhaenyra from not going into battle, but how can he really make that calculation? Not to mention, it's not uncommon for leaders to fight in wars. What if by stopping Rhaenyra, he's decreasing the odds of survival for other characters, or flat out losing the battle? If he is acting selfishly and is fearful that Jace will kill him, what's stopping Rhaenyra from doing so? His prospects of survival are arguably worse by locking her in. So as a whole, this individual issue shines a spotlight on Ryan Condal forcing a character conflict that doesn't make sense within this context. Or if he really wanted there to be a conflict here, then he should have explored it at a different angle that doesn't indirectly compromise other aspects of the story. Like, honestly, I think it would have been an interesting examination if Rhaenyra actually allowed Jace to go here. The general assumption being that his risk of death is very low because if Aemond showed up on Vhagar, then Jace could quickly retreat back to Dragonstone. This narratively is a more authentic way to show Rhaenyra making a grievous mistake. It's now her fault that Jace died for allowing him to go, and not how it is in the show where she's completely absolved of his death, and if anything now, it oddly lies on Sir Laurent and of course Rhaena, as we'll get into later. So ironically, I feel the way they're representing Rhaenyra so far is backwards in terms of the flaws she's portraying. She's unreasonably acting foolish in a contrived manner, instead of her making organic mistakes. Then before moving on, the dialogue of Rhaenyra crashing out was borderline really bad.
I may appear to have the weak and feeble body of a woman, but I possess the heart and spirit of a king.
With that line of dialogue, Ryan Condal may as well have just looked into the camera and said the thesis of the show. It wasn't authentic at all, and people have pointed out online that this is also a quote from Queen Elizabeth. For a show that takes such a long time to write, I honestly expect much better. Then before going into the Battle of the Gullet, we still have to talk about Alicent. Similar to Jace and Rhaenyra having some added interpersonal conflict, Ryan Condal introduces a curveball of Aemond deciding to stay in King's Landing, prompted by Aegon leaving last season. Originally in the book, Aemond leaves with Cole, and the reason why Aegon flees was because Rhaenyra was coming to take King's Landing. This change isn't that big of a deal, but it seems like they mostly change it as an excuse to feature an examination of Aemond desperately craving the love of his mother, since Alicent kind of exploits that weakness. Without addressing the kiss yet. This general messed up psyche for his character is intriguing. I liked how they represented this last season with Alicent desperately trying to influence him while her power was slipping away. So further amplifying that and also attacking his fear of an upcoming certain death was a good moment. The kiss, however, goes over the line in my opinion. Something I feel you'd throw in to shock the audience for the sake of it. Personally, I'd prefer this internal character flaw to remain more nuanced instead of what Ryan Condal was cooking here. Also, I know incest is a core part of Game of Thrones, but never in the way of mother and child. The whole point of its utilization was to keep bloodlines pure by marrying siblings, and not whatever this is. And oddly enough, this is the second time that Ryan has done this.
If I had a nickel for every time I was doomed by a puppet, I'd have 2 nickels, which isn't a lot, but it's weird that it happened twice.
So while I don't think this is devastating heresy, it's just something that probably should have remained on the whiteboard of ideas. Briefly touching on other scenes before the Gullet, Cole and Gwaine being together, non-romantically of course, is one of Ryan Condal's best changes. I love their pairing because their characters operate as a major juxtaposition. Cole is going through a very cynical arc, embracing being ignoble, while Gwaine is very much not touched by that corruption, featuring a stark contrast. The Dragon Seeds are tasked with waiting at Harrenhal to ambush Vhagar, which is a departure from the book because they're present at the Gullet. I like this change because reducing the number of dragons increases the danger for Baela and Jace, along with putting more of a focus on them and the battle not being extremely convoluted. It's also a pretty good idea to have the Dragon Seeds try and kill Aemond, effectively removing his presence at little cost to the people she actually cares about. The characterization here is also solid, sprinkling in a little trauma for Ulf and establishing the misconstrued expectations of the reward for these dragon seeds. We get introduced to Ormond Hightower and Jon Roxton. Both immediately effectively communicate their characters in a heartbeat. Love how smug and spoiled Ormond is. Bro is so used to living in a posh and pristine environment that he has to huff some nicer scents to wash out the terrible aroma of the countryside. Jon as well is just a unit. Can't wait to see him use his Valyrian steel sword. And with all of that boring nonsense out of the way, we can finally get to the action, because battles are guaranteed 10 out of 10s. But in all seriousness, battle episodes tend to skew towards the best in Game of Thrones because they not only feature crazy spectacle, but also massive moments of payoff in the story and integral cathartic character moments, along with exciting twists that generally lead the narrative in an exciting direction. The Battle of the Gullet features some of this. However, right off the bat, I don't think Lohar as a villain is at all an interesting character. Given the vast array of colorful people from the books in this general setting, it's pretty underwhelming what Ryan Condal ended up coming up with. Like, you could easily cherry pick and combine the best characters from this region that we have never seen in the show. Instead, it's mostly a generic pirate, and the whole emphasis surrounding her character is her gender, as Ryan and Sarah want to reinforce the themes of the show on each side. But while in that pursuit, I don't think they actually made a fun and engaging villain with actual depth, kind of falling into the Euron Greyjoy trap where you have a lot of potential to create an awesome character, but end up making a glorified generic pirate. Also, the moment where she broke off to plainly state her hidden motivation to Thailand felt very inorganic. All the other characters, though, are much better. I really enjoyed the scene Alan and Corlys have before the battle, re-emphasizing their relationship and how Corlys wants to get closer to Alan despite his reluctance. There's a lot of complexity here that makes their relationship magnetic. Then, to go into some overall positives for the Gullet before my criticisms, Ramin Djawadi is a master as always. The music here really punctuates the building sense of desperation, and it all explodes in this epic euphoric tidal wave when we enter the battle. The production value is truly unprecedented. I don't really need to talk about how great the CGI is here, and something I particularly loved was the set in the last third of the battle, with the ship cracking in half. Purely insane to be fighting on such a dynamic and complex set such as this. When they fell down into the lower half of the ship to be submerged in water and thus keep fighting, I was truly blown away. Then action-wise, I wouldn't strictly say it was flawless throughout the battle, and the main thing that annoyed me was the editing, where just as things start getting interesting in a scene, we'd cut away to a different perspective. The most notable example of this was when Lohar rams Corlys' ship and she jumps aboard. We cut back over to the dragons. I was like, oh, well, that was such an awesome and hyped up moment. Why not let this moment breathe and show the action and chaos? It's like an unproportioned amount of weight being placed on the buildup in comparison to the payoff. Choreography-wise, I wish there was a bit more scripted fights, but what we got was still really good, and the moments of quick-cut hyper-violence pushes the tone into being pure insanity. I'm also kind of surprised how Alan solos the ship of pirates. I didn't know he'd be this competent at fighting, and I'm sorry, sir, I was unfamiliar with your game. After this, the set evolving and shifting, thus further changing the dynamics of the fight, was incredible. We rarely see external events like this impact how a scene plays out, so that was a great idea in the writing process. From here, I'm going to mostly zoom out and tackle some wider positives and issues throughout the battle. One change I liked was Sheepstealer being a complete loose cannon, with Rhaena losing control over her dragon. It adds an unexpected source of conflict, and exploring the aspect of friendly fire from dragons shows how chaotic and gray war can be with them. I have seen people say that Rhaena was really dumb for bringing Sheepstealer into this fight, but I'm sure her intentions of desperately wanting to help out clouded her judgment. This also now places a primary responsibility and consequence where Rhaena causes the death of Jacaerys. Pretty different from the book where Aegon and Viserys were captured by the Triarchy and he was trying to get them back. So his death was more heroic, while in the show, his death is more tragic as it was indirectly caused by Rhaena. Moving forward as well, there will most definitely and probably be some tough confrontations for Rhaena. Like, how is Baela going to react towards her sister? Is their relationship going to be in turmoil, and is this going to be forgivable? Will Rhaenyra place any blame on Rhaena? So to me, I think this change adds in a bit of spice, and we already knew far out that Aegon and Viserys weren't going to be present here. While on the subject, Jace's death was perfect. His dragon slowly sinking into the ocean with him desperately trying to get Vermax to fly was tragic. Any dragon death is saddening given their majestic nature and their personal bond to their rider. You're watching a lifelong relationship shatter in real time. Then, just when we think Jace is safe and didn't drown, he suddenly gets struck by an arrow. I love the nonchalantness of this action. It takes your breath away, and I wish we actually ended the episode here on a longer lingering shot of Jace floating in the water, and not cutting back over to Alan for some reason, dampening that reverberating shock you feel. To balance out these positives, there are a couple sore points I want to touch on. Lohar nailing her target first try with the grapnel was very surprising. This should be something that's extremely difficult to achieve, and it feels like this happened because the budget was quickly running out and we needed to move on. The last thing I want this battle to do is remind me of Season 8. Lohar should at least miss a couple of times to indicate that what she's trying to pull off is an insane feat. Then the other annoying point of this war were characters falling into water in full-plated armor and seemingly not dying, like what happens with Tyland and Corlys. This genuinely isn't nitpicking, and it's more the main downside of wearing armor while on a ship. If you fall overboard, then you'll most definitely drown as you sink like a rock. From the previews, we see that Corlys survives, but now I'm questioning if Tyland actually survives this, because this isn't where he's supposed to die. But with how much Ryan has been changing the story in baffling ways, who knows at this point? It makes me think of Season 7 where Bronn and Jaime erupt from the water at the beginning of the next episode, so I don't know if that'll spontaneously happen with Tyland next week. Zooming out a bit further, let's analyze the battle structure because I feel it was lopsided in terms of how much screen time each part of it received. Going in, most of us probably had the expectation that this would be a large-scale naval battle. However, that aspect of the sequence only lasted about 5 minutes until it evolved into a 1v1 chase, swapping out something that was going to be large-scale on the surface and ended up being much smaller. Additionally, it feels weird how we spend way more time focusing on the tension of narrowly going through Dragonstone Pass in comparison to other areas. I took a step back in that moment and thought, it's odd how this moment so far included the most suspense. It made me realize how this aspect was severely lacking in the first part of the sequence. Imagine how much more suspenseful it would have been if we were following our characters going into the battle, instead of coming in as it's already well underway. Doing this takes away that buildup of anticipation and dread. That's where the suspense comes from, and seeing how the stratagem unfolds during the start of the war would have been very intriguing and exciting. The action in this section, as it is in the show, feels too superficial, and once our characters leave the scene, it makes the dragon's presence now not as impactful. There's no longer any tangible characters left on the ships that are intertwining with their presence. Like Sheepstealer as an example, torching every and any ship lacked stakes. There were no characters around that were actually in danger on the boats, just unnamed Valyrian soldiers. It would undoubtedly hit much harder if Corlys was still in this setting. Not only does he have to worry about the Triarchy, but there's an added twist of there being a threat from the sky now, creating more tension as to if Sheepstealer will end up killing Alan and Corlys. Sheepstealer's presence still has an impact in that it results in Jace's death. It just could have been far greater and more horrific, seeing that dragon from the viewpoint of characters on the sea. So as a whole this episode, I don't think the writing was up to par for the quality standards of this franchise, especially coming off of Dunk and Egg, where I'd honestly much rather watch the Trial of the Seven again over this battle. Just because something has a much higher budget for spectacle doesn't make it better. Resonant characters and their journeys is what sells a riveting story. Then, outside of the action, most scenes felt like they had some kind of issue, and trying to achieve the function of being an introductory episode and a climactic episode creates a jarring pace, leaving a lot of confusing, incohesive elements of the narrative if you aren't deeply following the story in detail and reading the source material. I'd assume and hope episodes from here get better as we ease back into a more normal tempo, or if you love this episode like IGN giving it a 10 out of 10, then I guess the season may go downhill from here. Thanks for watching, and I'll try to be covering the season weekly in episodic reviews. If you want something to tide you over until next week, I also made a comparative analysis on Ryan Condal misunderstanding Fire and Blood. My Letterboxd, Discord, and Patreon links are in the description, and have a nice day. Thanks as always to my amazing top patron, Logan Farmer.